Hey guys, welcome back. So today I just finished taking a casting of one of these Derwent jet engine combustor liners. People call them flame tubes, some people call them flame canister, whatever. The whole thing is the flame canister is a whole assembly. This is the liner. These are used to make the IG-88 heads and all the cantina drink dispensers, and they end up in a few other places. So anyway, I was doing this and I was cleaning up the mold here and getting ready to put it away, and I was thinking I should probably talk about this a little bit because I marked this thing off. I marked this after every casting. That casting I just took is number 62 out of this mold. Now, if you've been on my channel for a while, you may have seen a video. I posted one a long time ago when I first made this mold, and I'll see if I can put it at the end of this one if I can find it. And at the time, you know, this was like a pretty big investment for this mold. I think for the materials to make this mold, I had to pay around $500 to get all of the components. I didn't use $500 worth of materials, but I needed to pay that up front to get all the stuff. So like the silicone alone is about 200 bucks. The different epoxy components to the shell was about another $300, and then yes, more than, because I also had to get fiberglass cloth, so probably more than $500 to put this mold together. But it has made 62 castings now, which has been awesome, and a lot of these castings have ended up in some really cool places. But I wanted to talk about how this mold is made and how it's held up so long, because typically a mold, if you have a good mold, might get 50 castings out of it, and that's doing pretty well. The fact that this is 62 now and the castings still look really, really good, I think says a lot to maybe how the upkeep was done. And one of the things that I do is with these molds is every 5th casting or so, I will spray a little mold release in here. It just keeps the silicone fresh, and it seems to work well. I don't do it for every single one. I don't like to get the mold release on the castings as much as I can help it, because it makes them harder to paint. And then between all the castings, even after I spray the mold release, I will put some baby powder. This is talc based, but you can use cornstarch based too. Cornstarch is healthier. This stuff is bad for you if you breathe it. And I'll basically powder the mold after I take the casting, and then brush it around with a little brush, just really gently. And one of the things with brushing this in that you got to be careful with is that this little metal band here, the edges of it can catch and put little nicks in your mold. So the few issues I've got on my castings, there's maybe 3 or 4 tiny little bumps that show up on my castings, and they're from the brush nicking the mold. They're really small. They clean up in about a second each. Literally, like I can take a razor and go whoop, and they're gone. They're tiny, but I know they're there, and they're caused by these brushes. The thing I did with my favorite powder brush is I took a piece of a bicycle tube, about 2 inches or 1.5 inches, and I basically slid it over this metal part here to protect the mold from this little metal piece, and it works really, really well. I've had that brush for a long time, and that one never nicks anything, but I don't know where it's at. It's probably in my shop somewhere. But yeah, bike tube around the little piece here, or some tape, can be really good. Yeah, let's talk about how this mold is made. It is a matrix mold. The silicone is a platinum cure silicone called Mold Star 30 by Smooth On. It cures relatively quickly. It's faster than working with most tin-based silicones, or take longer. There are some that are quick, but for the most part they take a little longer. Platinum Cure has a longer archival life, and it shrinks less than tin cure silicones. Tin cure can be easier to work with because you don't have to worry about the silicone being inhibited from curing by certain things on the surface. Like platinum cure silicones are sensitive to things like latex, and there's some other things that if you have the wrong stuff on the surface, the silicone might not cure properly. So you got to be really careful in that regard. But platinum cure overall is my preference. I like it more. And this silicone doesn't need the Mold Star 30 doesn't need to be degassed because it's very low viscosity, so it flows nice. You don't need to degas it, and there's no bubbles really in the surface at all. It came out really good. And then this was done as a matrix mold, which means that the silicone was poured in after the mother mold was made. Let's pull this out of here so you can look. So let's stick this to the side. Big chunk of rubber. You can see it's got the keys and everything are all in it. And this hole is where you pour the silicone in. After you create the shell, Then you pour the silicone through, you put the shell back together, pour the silicone into the mold. This was made with, it's an epoxy-based mother mold, really, really sturdy. The surface is called, is made with a material called epoxy gray, from Smooth On, is what the initial coat. And there's 2 coats of epoxamite, which is basically epoxy fiberglass, where it's got a fiberglass cloth and then epoxy. And then an 1/8 to 1/4 inch thick layer of syntactic dough, also epoxy based. It's very light. You basically mix up like a dough and you coat the surface. And then on top of that, 3 layers of epoxy fiberglass. So overkill, yeah, you don't need to go so far with the mold, but what that does is it makes this really light, because the syntactic dough is very, very light. It's called freeform air. But what you're doing is effectively making the thickness of the mold, you know, a good 1/4, almost 1/2 inch thick in some places. So you have this mold that's maybe the weight of a mold that would be like, I don't know, 5 thin layers, but it's this nice thick housing, incredibly stiff, super, super stiff mold, light, and very, very strong. The epoxy is ridiculously durable, so that is super nice. Again, it's made 62 castings, so I can't complain. And then the silicone is poured through that hole and fills the void between the part you're casting and the shell, and then you get the pieces of your mold. So we'll push this back in, and all those keys will line up really nice. Basically, to make that, you clay up the mold. You put clay over the piece that you're trying to mold to mimic the shape of the silicone, what you want the silicone to be when you're done. God, I'm like having trouble talking today. Sorry, guys. So anyway, that's how you do it. You do 2 halves. They go together like so, and they bolt up. You'll notice I got some little shims at the bottom. The very bottom edge of this, when I poured the silicone, was not 100% tight. It was snug, but not totally tight. And what was happening is when I would tighten the bolt, the very bottom, the silicone would squish a little bit, and it makes a mark on the casting. So when I added the shims in, it fixed that. But anyway, let's talk about the castings. So 62 of them. The first one that came out of the mold, I kept for myself. It's in my living room. The next 8 went to Scum and Villainy Cantina in Hollywood, which that was kind of the motivation for me to make the mold, because they needed some of these, and I was like, I can do that. I have an original part, we can cast it, we can do that. And then within this number, there's some random ones that I just sold to people, but there are 8 more of them went to episode 5 of The Mandalorian, thanks to Tom Spina Designs for this one. So if you see the scene in the cantina with the droids and that bar, all the pieces there in the background, the bar came out of this mold. And then 28 of them, 28? I think 28. I gotta count again, but pretty sure it's 28, went to Galaxy's Edge, both in Anaheim and in Orlando, Florida, which is really, really cool. So thanks to Tom Spina Designs for this one as well. It's neat to see like everybody's photos, and then there's tons of them there that all came out of this very mold. The fact that so many of them have ended up in cool places has been pretty neat, and it made me feel like putting the money into this mold was definitely worthwhile. And again, it's still holding up. I'm assuming the silicone is going to start to break down after a while, but it's still good so far. So anyway, I figured I'd share that. I'll put a link to the original video that I posted about this ages ago, maybe 4 years ago. I'll try to put that in here somewhere so you guys can check it out. And yeah, so hopefully it's informative. If you're thinking about making a mold, you take a little bit of time and some extra money up front. It can last you a really long time, and if it's a part that people seem to want, it definitely will pay for itself in the long run. So I had no idea that it would. I was just like, I want that thing molded, and yeah, so that's how it happened. But yeah, so this is my Royce Derwent combustor liner mold. Thanks for stopping by. See you kids soon. Bye.